The blizzard had claimed the peaks of the Wind River Range long before the sun dared to set. It was a whiteout, a wall of snow and ice that erased the world, leaving only the biting wind to scream through the valley. On the treacherous pass of Highway 28, a battered black pickup truck fought against the drifts. Inside, Elias Thorne gripped the steering wheel with hands that were scarred and steady. Elias was 42, a man carved from granite and regret. Once a top-tier explosive ordnance disposal specialist for the Army, he now spent his days clearing fallen timber and his nights trying to forget the silence that follows a detonation. He had left the service, but the service had never really left him. His eyes, dark and heavy, constantly scanned the perimeter. Even here, where the only enemy was the cold, the wipers slapped frantically against the windshield. Fighting a losing battle, Elias leaned forward, his knuckles white. He was miles from his cabin, miles from warmth. When he saw it, a shadow in the snow, most men would have missed it. Most would have mistaken it for a fallen branch or a trick of the headlights. But Elias knew the shape of suffering. He slowed the truck, the tires crunching heavily as he pulled onto the narrow shoulder. He grabbed his heavy flashlight and stepped out. The wind hit him like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs. "Hello," he shouted, though the wind tore the word away instantly. The shadow moved. It didn't run. It didn't retreat. It dragged itself forward. Into the beam of light crawled a Belgian Malinois. The dog was a skeleton wrapped in tawny fur, shivering so violently it looked like it was vibrating. But it was the eyes that stopped Elias cold. They weren't pleading. They were fierce, intelligent, and desperate. The dog collapsed 10 feet away, but as Elias took a step, a low, rumbling growl vibrated through the animal's chest. It wasn't aggression. It was a warning. "Stay back." Elias froze. He saw the tactical collar half buried in the neck fur, the jagged tear along the dog's flank, and the way the animal positioned itself. It wasn't protecting itself. It was shielding something behind it, tucked into the hollow of a frozen stump. "Easy, soldier," Elias said, his voice dropping to that low, calm frequency he used to use when diffusing a live wire. "I'm not here to hurt you." He crouched low, ignoring the snow soaking through his jeans. He took off one glove and extended a hand, palm up. The Malinois watched him, head lowering, fighting the urge to pass out. "I know the look," Elias murmured. "You're holding the line, but you don't have to hold it alone." The dog stared at him for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. Then, with a sigh that sounded heartbreakingly human, the animal's head dropped into the snow. The energy was gone. Elias moved fast. He reached the dog, checking for a pulse, faint, threading, but there. He looked behind the dog into the hollow of the tree stump. There, wrapped in what looked like the shredded remains of a tactical vest, was a single puppy. It couldn't have been more than 4 weeks old, a tiny ball of black fur, silent and freezing. "Damn it," Elias whispered, the curse sounding like a prayer. He scooped the puppy up, tucking it instantly inside his heavy coat against his chest. Then he turned his attention to the mother. She was heavy, dead weight now, but Elias lifted her with a grunt of effort, cradling her broken body. As he navigated the drifts back to the truck, he placed them on the passenger seat, cranking the heater to the maximum. The mother didn't move, but the puppy let out a tiny high-pitched squeak against his ribs. Elias put the truck in gear, his heart hammering a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a rescue. He had seen the markings on the tactical collar before the dog collapsed. It was a redacted serial number. This wasn't a stray. This was a ghost. And if there was one thing Elias knew about ghosts, it was that someone was usually hunting them. The cabin was a fortress of solitude, built from rough-hewn logs and situated at the end of a dead-end track. Elias kicked the door shut against the storm and carried his guests to the rug in front of the wood stove. He worked with the precision of a field medic, saline to clean the wounds, staple gun for the delaceration on the flank, IV fluids rigged from an emergency kit he kept in the pantry. The Malinois was tough, even unconscious. Her muscles were dense, built for combat. Elias cleaned the mud from her ear and saw the tattoo. K97 Echo. "Echo," Elias whispered. "Is that your name, girl?" He settled the puppy into a cardboard box lined with old wool blankets near the fire. The little one was dehydrated but alive, fueled by the warmth returning to its blood. Elias sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his forehead. The silence of the cabin returned, but it felt different now. Heavier. He walked to the window, peering out into the white abyss. The snow was covering his tire tracks, erasing the path that led here. That was good, because 20 miles back, near where he found them, he had seen something else on the road, tire tracks that didn't belong to a local. Heavy, wide treads, the kind used by armored SUVs. They were looking for her. Elias walked to the gun cabinet in the corner. He keyed in the code and pulled out a bolt-action rifle and a service pistol he hadn't fired in a decade. He checked the chambers, the metallic click-clack sounding loud in the room. He looked back at the sleeping dog and the tiny life she had almost died to protect. "Rest up, Echo," Elias said to the darkness. "The night is long, and I have a feeling the war isn't over yet." The morning sun didn't bring warmth. It only brought a blinding, diamond-hard glare off the snow. Elias sat in the worn leather armchair, a mug of black coffee steaming in his hand, watching the Belgian Malinois. She hadn't slept. For 6 hours, her amber eyes had tracked his every movement, assessing him, calculating threat levels. The puppy, a tiny scrap of life, slept soundly against her belly. "You need to eat," Elias said softly. He placed a bowl of warm broth and shredded venison near her. The dog didn't move toward the food. She looked at the bowl, then at Elias, then nudged the sleeping puppy with her nose. She wouldn't eat until she knew her charge was safe. Elias understood. He moved the box closer to the fire, then stepped back, giving her space. "I'm not the enemy, Echo. Eat." She hesitated, then finally lowered her head, lapping up the broth with frantic speed. When she finished, she didn't collapse back into sleep. She tried to stand. Her back legs trembled, and a whimper escaped her throat, but she forced herself upright. She limped over to Elias, her claws clicking faintly on the wooden floor. She sniffed his boots, then his hands that smelled of gun oil and antiseptic. Then, she did something that broke through Elias's hardened defenses. She leaned her entire weight against his shin, a silent thank you. "You're welcome," he murmured, resting his hand on her head. "Now let's see what you brought with you." He picked up the tactical collar he had removed the night before. It was heavy, military-grade nylon, woven with Kevlar. He carried it to the kitchen table and turned on the overhead lamp. His EOD training kicked in. He wasn't looking for a bomb, but he was looking for a trigger. He ran his fingers along the stitching. There, a slight irregularity in the seam. He took a small knife and carefully picked the stitches. A tiny silver chip slid out onto the table. It pulsed with a faint, rhythmic red light. A transponder, active. "Damn," Elias hissed. He grabbed a heavy hammer from his toolbox and smashed the chip into dust with a single, violent strike. The red light died, but the damage was done. If it had been pulsing, it had been sending a signal. They knew. Elias looked out the window. The valley was silent, a pristine white bowl under the blue sky. But silence in the mountains could be deceptive. Sound traveled for miles in this air. He went to the closet and pulled out his winter gear. "We have work to do," he told Echo. He spent the next hour moving. He drove his truck around the back of the cabin, covering it with a white tarp to blend it into the snowdrifts. He checked the perimeter, setting simple tripwire alarms monofilament line connected to signal flares along the only access road. When he returned inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Echo was standing by the window, her ears pricked forward, her body tense as a bowstring. A low growl rumbled in her throat. Elias joined her. At first he saw nothing, just the endless white. Then, he heard it, the faint, rhythmic thrum of an engine. Not a truck, a drone. A small quadcopter, sleek and black, buzzed over the tree line, scanning the property. It hovered for a moment above the cabin's chimney smoke, like a mechanical vulture, before banking sharply and returning the way it came. "Scout," Elias said grimly. "The main force is behind it." He turned to the room. He had maybe 20 minutes before the vehicles arrived. He looked at the puppy, who was now awake and chewing clumsily on the edge of the blanket. "Fuse," Elias said, naming him. "We'll call you Fuse, because you're the start of something explosive." He looked at Echo. "Can you fight?" The Malinois looked at him, her eyes burning with a cold, focused rage. She didn't need to answer. She was a weapon that had been left to rust. But the edge was still sharp. Elias grabbed his rifle and a box of ammunition. He overturned the heavy oak table to create a barricade near the door. He doused the fire in the stove to kill the smoke signal. The cabin went cold and dim. "Get down," he commanded. Echo limped behind the overturned table, curling her body around Fuse. Elias took his position at the window. The rifle stock pressed against his shoulder, his breathing slow and steady. 10 minutes later, the first black SUV crested the hill. Then a second, then a third. They moved in a tactical column, bold and arrogant, tires churning the snow. They stopped 50 yards from the cabin. Doors opened. 6 men stepped out. They wore gray tactical gear, no insignias, faces covered by balaclavas. They carried suppressed carbines. This wasn't a search party. This was a cleanup crew. The leader raised a hand, signaling the team to fan out. Elias clicked the safety off. His world narrowed down to the crosshairs of his scope. "Welcome to Wyoming," he whispered. The snow muffled the sound of the approaching boots, but Elias didn't need to hear them. He felt the vibration in the floorboards. Outside, the leader of the tactical team signaled with 2 fingers. "Breach and clear." 2 men broke off, circling toward the rear of the cabin. 4 others advanced on the front porch, moving with the eerie silence of professionals. Elias waited. He wasn't aiming at the men. He was aiming at a small, orange plastic stake he had driven into the snow near the porch steps 10 minutes ago. The moment the point man's boot snagged the invisible monofilament line, a magnesium flare erupted. Hiss, crack. The world turned blindingly white. The flare burned at 2,000 degrees. A miniature sun screaming against the snow. The tactical team, wearing night vision goggles to navigate the gloom, were instantly blinded, their optics washed out in a haze of white static. "Contact! Eyes! My eyes!" one man shouted, stumbling back. Elias didn't hesitate. He shifted his aim to the lead SUV's engine block. Bang! Bang! 2.BH Lam rounds punched through the grille. Steam hissed violently as the radiator exploded. The vehicle was dead. "Suppressive fire!" the leader screamed. Bullets shredded the cabin's front window, sending glass spraying across the floor like diamond dust. Elias ducked below the sill, covering his head. The air filled with the sharp scent of pine wood and cordite. "Echo, stay!" Elias roared over the noise. But the threat wasn't just in front. From the back of the cabin, the kitchen window shattered. A black-clad figure vaulted through the frame, landing in a crouch, weapon raised. He had flanked them while Elias was engaged at the front. Elias spun around, raising his pistol, but he was a fraction of a second too slow. The intruder leveled his muzzle at Elias's chest. Then, a blur of tawny fur launched from the shadows. Echo hit the man with the force of a missile. She ignored her fractured leg, ignored the pain. She was pure, distilled fury. Her jaws clamped onto the man's forearm, crushing down on the Kevlar and bone beneath. The man screamed, his rifle clattering to the floor. "Get it off! Get it off!" He swung a fist, striking Echo's ribs, but she didn't let go. She shook her head violently, dragging him off balance, pulling him away from Elias. Elias stepped forward and delivered a single, calculated strike with the butt of his rifle to the man's temple. The intruder crumbled. Echo released him instantly and backed away, teeth bared, chest heaving. Blood fresh and bright-stained her bandage, but her eyes were locked on the window, waiting for the next one. "Good girl," Elias breathed, adrenaline flooding his veins. "Good girl." The gunfire at the front stopped. The team outside was regrouping, likely switching to thermal optics or preparing grenades. The element of surprise was gone. The cabin was now a trap. "We can't stay here," Elias said, his mind racing through exit strategies. "They'll burn us out." He grabbed his heavy go bag from the hookah habit from his service days that he never broke. He looked at the snowmobile keys hanging by the door, then shook his head. Too loud, too exposed. "We walk," he decided, "into the timber, where their trucks can't follow." He scooped up the box with Fuse, tucking the puppy into the specialized pouch inside his parka. He grabbed a coil of rope and looked at Echo. "This is going to hurt," he told her honestly. "But if we stay, we die." Echo looked at the fallen man on the kitchen floor, then at Elias. She gave a short, sharp bark. "Move." Elias kicked open the back door. The blizzard was raging harder now. A white curtain that reduced visibility to 0. Perfect. They sprinted, Elias carrying the weight of his past and the puppy, Echo limping but keeping pace into the dense tree line. Behind them, a dull thump echoed, followed by a whoosh of air. An incendiary grenade. Elias looked back once. Orange flames were already licking up the walls of his cabin, devouring the logs, the photos, the life he had tried to build. He turned his face to the wind. He didn't care about the house. The only things that mattered were breathing beside him in the snow. They were ghosts now, and the mountain was their territory. The forest was a cathedral of ice, dark and unforgiving. They had been moving for an hour, but in the deep snow, it felt like days. The glow of the burning cabin had faded behind them, swallowed by the storm in the distance. Now, there was only the wind. Elias walked in the rear, his rifle held across his chest, stepping in his own footprints to confuse anyone tracking them. Then doubling back. It was an old sniper, trick-looping the trail so you could ambush your hunter. Echo was struggling. The adrenaline from the fight had worn off, leaving only the throbbing ache of her fractured leg and the new wounds from the struggle. She was limping heavily, sinking deep into the powder with every third step. Elias stopped. He knelt beside her, the snow piling around his knees. "You're done walking," he said quietly. He didn't wait for her permission. He swung his rifle to his back and scooped the 60-pound Malinois into his arms. She grunted, a low sound of pain, but settled her head against his shoulder. Inside his parka, the puppy, Fuse, was a warm lump against his chest, sleeping through the chaos. Elias was carrying 2 lives now. He pushed forward, his thighs burning with the effort. He knew this terrain better than the men chasing him. He knew that half a mile east, the ground dropped away into a jagged ravine called the Narrows. It was a suicide run in a blizzard, but it was the only place the tactical team couldn't bring their heavy sleds or vehicles. 10 minutes later, the ground began to slope sharply downward. The wind here was ferocious, channeling through the rock walls like a jet engine. Elias slid down the embankment, his boots carving deep furrows into the ice. He reached the bottom, a frozen creek bed littered with boulders. He set Echo down gently, under the overhang of a granite shelf. "Stay. Watch." He pulled a flare from his vest, the last one. He didn't light it. Instead, he broke a chemical light stick, the kind used for marking trails, and tied it to a low branch 20 yards downstream from their hiding spot. It glowed a faint, ghostly green. Then, he backtracked to the overhang and covered himself and Echo with a white thermal blanket he pulled from his bag. They became part of the snowbank. "Wait for it," he whispered. Echo's ears swiveled. She heard them before he did. Voices, distorted by the wind, but close. Thermal is useless in this spindrift. A man's voice crackled over a radio. "I can't see heat signatures past 10 yards. They're on foot." Another voice replied. Harder. Colder. "Track the blood. The dog is bleeding." Elias tightened his grip on his pistol. He felt Echo tense against him, her muscles coiling. He pressed a hand to her neck. Steady. 3 beams of light cut through the darkness above them on the ridge. The pursuers were scanning the ravine. One of the beams caught the faint green glow of the light stick Elias had planted downstream. "Contact," one shouted. "Green marker at 3 o'clock. Movement." The team on the ridge opened fire. Suppressed rounds thwipped into the snow around the decoy light, chewing up the branch and the ice. They were shooting at shadows. "Cease fire. Cease fire." The leader barked after a few seconds. "Move up. Flank them." The sound of boots crunched away from Elias's position, moving toward the decoy. Elias exhaled slowly, a cloud of steam dissipating instantly in the gale. He had bought them time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15. He looked down at Echo. She was shivering now, not from fear but from the creeping hypothermia. The cold was a slower, quieter killer than the men with guns, but it was just as deadly. "We have to keep moving," Elias whispered. "I know a place. An old trapper's cave. 2 miles. He lifted her again. She felt heavier this time. As he climbed out of the ravine on the far side, leaving the tactical team hunting ghosts in the creek bed, Elias realized something. The men chasing them weren't just mercenaries. They moved with unit cohesion. They used standard military call signs. Whoever had erased Echo from the records, whoever had ordered the strike on his cabin, they were the same people who had trained him. He wasn't fighting criminals. He was fighting the system he used to serve, and the only evidence of their crime was the shivering dog in his arms and the chip he had smashed on his kitchen table. But as he crested the ridge, the storm broke for a split second. In the distance, through a gap in the clouds, he saw the faint, flashing lights of a cell tower on the next peak. If he could get there, if he could tap into the emergency relay, he could send a message, not to the police, they wouldn't believe him, but to the one person he hadn't spoken to in 5 years, the only man who owed him a life, General Vance. Elias adjusted his grip on Echo. "Hang on, girl," he gritted out through chattering teeth. "We're gonna make a phone call." The climb to the jagged peak where the cell tower stood was a slow, agonizing war against gravity. Elias couldn't feel his feet anymore. They were just numb blocks of ice stumbling over unseen rocks. His lungs burned with every inhalation of the sub-zero air, but the weight in his arms kept him moving. Echo had stopped shivering. That was a bad sign. Her body was shutting down to preserve the core heat for her heart and for the puppy pressed against Elias's chest. The tower loomed out of the whiteout like a skeleton of steel, its red warning light pulsing rhythmically in the storm. Thump, 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 a heartbeat in the void. At the base of the tower sat a small, reinforced maintenance shed. Elias dropped to his knees in front of the steel door. He didn't have the key, and his lock-picking tools were back in the burning cabin. He laid Echo gently in the snow, her eyes barely open, glazed and distant. "Stay with me," he rasped, his voice sounding like sandpaper. "Don't you fade out now, Echo. Not when we're this close." He pulled his pistol. He wrapped his scarf around the barrel to muffle the sound and pressed it against the heavy padlock. Crack. The lock shattered. Elias kicked the door open and dragged Echo and the box inside. The shed was freezing, smelling of ozone and stale oil, but it was out of the wind. The silence was sudden and ringing. Elias didn't rest. He pulled a heavy tarp from a shelf and draped it over Echo and Fuse, creating a small heat tent. He rubbed Echo's chest vigorously, trying to spark some warmth back into her. She licked his hand on Ceslo, weak, but affectionate. "Okay," Elias breathed. "Okay." He turned to the communications panel on the wall. It was a chaotic mess of wires and blinking LEDs, a relay station for the valley's emergency services. Elias pulled a multi-tool from his belt. His fingers were stiff, clumsy, but his muscle memory was perfect. He unscrewed the faceplate, stripped 2 wires, and bypassed the encryption lock. He wasn't trying to make a phone call. He was hijacking the emergency frequency. He slipped the headset on. Static hissed in his ear like angry hornets. He keyed the mic. Command override. Authorization. Sierra Tango 19er. Initiate priority patch to Pentagon switchboard. Target. General Marcus Vance. Silence. Just the static. Then, a robotic voice. Authorization. Recognized. Connecting. It took 30 seconds an eternity. Then, a click. "This line is secure," a gruff voice said. It sounded tired. "Identify." "It's Sandman," Elias said. A pause on the other end. Heavy, pregnant with 5 years of silence. "Elias?" General Vance's voice dropped an octave. "You're supposed to be a ghost. Why are you surfacing on a military channel?" "I found something, Marcus. Or rather, she found me." Elias looked at the lump under the tarp. K-Chin unit, Belgian Malinois, serial K-Chin Bay Echo. She had a transponder chip. I destroyed it, but a cleanup crew is already here. 6 men. Heavy armor. Professional. Echo. Vance breathed. The shock in his voice was real. "Elias, listen to me carefully. That dog is the only surviving asset from Operation Blackglass. The data isn't on the chip. It's in the dog." Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" "Biological encoding. Synthetic DNA sequence in her bloodstream. She's carrying the identity of every deep-cover operative in the Eastern Hemisphere. That's why they wiped the records. That's why they want her dead. If she's captured, networks fall. People die." Elias looked at the dog. A living hard drive, a weapon, and a mother. "They're not getting her," Elias said, his voice turning into cold steel. "Elias, the team sent for her, that's Unit Bone. They don't take prisoners. They triangled your position. The moment you opened this channel, they know you're at the tower." "I figured," Elias said calmly. How far out is your nearest extraction team? Wyoming. In this weather? Vance hesitated. 2 hours, maybe 3. I'm scrambling a chopped from the base in Cheyenne. But Elias, you have to hold. 2 hours, Elias repeated. He looked at the thin metal door of the shed. He looked at his rifle, which had half a magazine left. He looked at Echo, who had lifted her head, sensing the tension in his voice. Get the bird in the air, Marcus. I'll buy you your time. Elias. Wait. Elias ripped the headset cord from the panel. The line went dead. He turned back to the door. Through the small reinforced window, he saw lights cutting through the storm at the bottom of the peak. Snowmobiles. 4 of them, climbing fast. He wasn't going to hide in the shed. That was a coffin. He looked at the maintenance ladder that ran up the side of the steel tower, disappearing into the blizzard above. It was suicide. It was madness, but it was the high ground. He grabbed the tarp and wrapped Echo and Fuse securely, fashioning a makeshift sling that he strapped to his chest. It was heavy, awkward, and restricted his movement. He kicked the door open. The wind hit him, screaming. The snowmobiles were 500 yards down, their engines whining like chainsaws. Elias grabbed the icy rungs of the ladder and began to climb, up into the heart of the storm, up where the bullets would have to fight the wind. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a guardian, and he would fight them from the sky. Elias was 80 feet in the air, suspended in a freezing purgatory. The ladder rungs were slick with black ice. Every step was a gamble, his boots scrabbling for purchase while the wind tried to peel him off the steel skeleton like a dead leaf. The weight of Echo and Fuse strapped to his chest was a heavy, warm anchor, pulling his center of gravity forward, threatening to tip him into the void. Below him, the world was a blur of whipping snow and muzzle flashes. Crack thwip. A bullet sparked off the steel rail inches from his left hand. The sound was swallowed by the gale, but the vibration traveled through the metal, stinging his numb fingers. Unit Bone wasn't hesitating. They were firing blindly into the storm, hoping to knock him down. Elias reached a grated maintenance platform, a small square of steel mesh trembling in the wind. He hauled himself over the edge and rolled onto his back, gasping for air that felt like broken glass in his lungs. He dragged himself behind a large relay box, sheltering Echo from the incoming fire. Stay down. He choked out, patting the tarp. He peeked over the edge. 3 beams of tactical light were dancing at the base of the tower. Then, he saw movement on the ladder. They were climbing. 2 shadows moving fast and efficient. They had magnetic gloves and climbing gear. Elias checked his rifle. 3 rounds left. He waited. He had to be sure. The lead climber was 50 feet down. Elias steadied his breathing, ignoring the violent shivering of his own body. He timed the sway of the tower, the gust of the wind. Bang. The shot was clean. The lead climber jerked backward, losing his grip. He fell silently into the white abyss, vanishing into the storm. The second climber didn't stop. He accelerated. Elias worked the bolt. Click. 2 rounds. A burst of automatic fire erupted from the climber's position, chewing up the grating beneath Elias. Sparks showered down on him. A shard of metal sliced his cheek, but he didn't flinch. Come on, Elias whispered, his vision tunneling. He rose to a knee, exposing himself to the wind. He aimed not at the climber, but at a thick sheet of ice that had formed on the crossbeam directly above the man. Bang. The ice shattered. A 100-pound slab of frozen sleet broke free and plummeted. It smashed into the climber, tearing him from the ladder. The man flailed and fell, his scream lost in the howl of the blizzard. Elias slumped back against the relay box. 1 round left, and his hands were so cold he could barely feel the trigger. Below, the remaining men on the ground had stopped shooting. They were regrouping, or waiting. Then, the radio in his pocket crackled. He had kept the headset. Target is cornered, a voice said, cutting through the static. Prepare the RPG. Bring the whole tower down. Elias closed his eyes. They didn't care about the data anymore. They just wanted the loose end tied up. If the tower fell, it was over. He looked down at Echo. Her head poked out from the tarp. Her eyes were groggy, but she looked at him with that same intense, unwavering trust. I'm sorry, girl, Elias whispered. I'm out of moves. He unclipped the holster of his pistol, preparing for a final, futile stand. And then, the wind changed. The air pressure dropped. The snow began to swirl in chaotic, violent patterns, not from the wind, but from a downdraft. Thump, 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 thump. The sound was deep, rhythmic, and beautiful. It vibrated in Elias's chest, louder than the storm. A dark shape materialized out of the whiteout, hovering dangerously close to the tower. A Black Hawk helicopter, painted in dark matte gray, fighting the turbulence. A spotlight blinded Elias. Then, a voice boomed over a PA system, distinct and terrifyingly loud. "Stand down. This is United States Military Command. Cease fire immediately, or be engaged." Below, the men of Unit Bone froze. They looked up, weapons raised, but hesitant. A side door on the Black Hawk slid open. A figure in a flight suit leaned out, clipped to a safety line. He didn't wave. He kicked something out of the door. A heavy winch cable dropped, swaying wildly in the wind. The horse collar harness dangling 10 feet from Elias's platform. It was too far. The wind was blowing it away from the tower. Elias stood up. He looked at the cable, dancing out of reach. He looked at the drop. He looked at the dog strapped to his chest. He had one chance. He holstered his weapon. He stepped back to the edge of the platform, finding his footing on the ice. "Trust me," he whispered to Echo. Elias ran. He launched himself off the tower, leaping into the empty air, arms outstretched, aiming for the swinging cable. For a second, there was only gravity. Elias plummeted through the white void, the wind tearing at his clothes, the weight of the dog pulling him down like a stone. His hands clawed at the air, searching for the steel lifeline. His fingers brushed the cold wire of the cable. He clamped down. The jolt nearly tore his arms from their sockets. He slammed into the heavy rubber of the horse collar harness, the impact knocking the breath out of him. He swung wildly, a pendulum in the gale, suspended 100 feet above the frozen earth. "Got him! Winch it! Winch it!" A voice screamed over the roar of the rotors. The cable tightened. Elias wrapped his legs around the wire, one hand gripping the steel, the other pressed protectively over the tarp on his chest. He felt Echo trembling against him, her heart hammering against his own ribs. "I got you," he gasped into the wind. "I got you." He was hauled upward, the ground falling away. The muzzle flashes from below stopped. Unit Bone wasn't going to shoot down a general's transport. They knew the game was over. Hands reached out from the open bay door, gloved, strong hands. They grabbed Elias by his harness and dragged him onto the metal deck of the helicopter. The door slid shut, sealing out the storm. The sound dropped to a dull, rhythmic thrum. Elias collapsed against the bulkhead, his lungs heaving. He immediately unclipped the sling and peeled back the tarp. Echo was limp, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. "Medic," Elias roared, his voice cracking. A flight medic was already there, pushing Elias aside gently. He placed an oxygen mask over Echo's muzzle and began checking her vitals. Elias sat back, his head resting against the vibrating wall of the chopper. He looked up to see a man sitting on the bench opposite him, older, with silver hair cut to regulation length and eyes that had seen too many wars. General Marcus Vance. Vance didn't speak at first. He just looked at the exhausted man and the dying dog. He reached into a cooler and tossed Elias a bottle of water. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic, Sandman," Vance said, though there was no humor in his voice. Elias cracked the bottle, his hands shaking so hard he spilled half of it. "She saved me, Marcus. Twice. Then we returned the favor," Vance said. He leaned forward. "The data she's carrying. It's going to burn a lot of bad people, Elias. But once we extract it, she's just a dog. A retired soldier. She's not just a dog," Elias whispered, watching the medic work. "She's my partner." The medic looked up, giving a thumbs up. "Pulse is stabilizing. She's warming up. She's a fighter." Elias closed his eyes, and for the first time in 10 years, he let himself sleep without a weapon in his hand. 6 months later, the Wyoming summer was a miracle of green. The valley, once a tomb of ice, was now alive with wildflowers, Indian paintbrush, and lupines swaying in the gentle breeze. The new cabin stood on the same foundation as the old one, but it was bigger, built with sturdy cedar and wide windows that let the light in. Elias stood on the porch, watching the driveway. A sign hung over the gate, "The Outpost Gun Rehabilitation Sanctuary." He wasn't hiding anymore. A black truck pulled up the gravel drive. General Vance stepped out, not in uniform this time, but in jeans and a flannel shirt. He walked up the steps, extending a hand. "Place looks good, Elias," Vance said. "It holds the heat better," Elias replied, shaking the hand firmly. "I brought the paperwork," Vance said, handing him a thick envelope. "Official discharge papers for Chin by Echo. Honorable service. Full benefits. She's officially a civilian. No more targets on her back." "Good," Elias said. "She's done with war." A screen door slammed. Echo trotted out onto the porch. Her limp was gone, though a faint scar ran along her flank where the fur had grown back lighter. She looked strong, sleek, and happy. She walked straight to Vance, sniffed his hand, and allowed him to scratch behind her ears. But then she turned and returned to Elias's side, leaning against his leg, her amber eyes scanning the tree line out of habit. Behind her, a clumsy, half-grown black puppy tumbled out chasing a butterfly. Fuse had grown into his paws, a bundle of energy and mischief. Elias looked at the mountains. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. "You know," Vance said, watching the dogs, "most men would have left her in the snow, saved themselves." Elias looked down at Echo. She looked up at him. That silent communication passing between them, the bond of two survivors who had walked through the fire and come out the other side. "I didn't save her, Marcus," Elias said softly. "She saved me." He knelt down, wrapping an arm around the dog's neck. The dog tag he had made for her glinted in the sun. It didn't have a serial number anymore, just one word: family. "We're clear," Elias whispered to her. Echo let out a contented sigh and laid her head on his knee. The watch was over. The long walk home was finished.